agility is something that we've heard more and more about. It's important for brands to be flexible, to be pliable, listen to their customers. How important is it for brands to be agile in their creative processes, in their their customer loyalty processes, to differentiate themselves from the competitors?
So here's what's so interesting is that we have found during brand planning. So it used to be 10 years ago, you brand planned and you planned possibly for the whole year. Particularly during the pandemic, obviously we all had to shift. We were really put through the ringer this year. The good news is that I think all marketers realize that they have that ability to adapt and to change. But I've also seen a trend over this year where they're not planning for the whole year. Maybe it's the pandemic, and maybe it's, they know that they don't know where things are going to be. And that's a good thing. Knowing that you don't know something is okay as well. But I think it's given us this ability to be comfortable in being flexible and nimble. What I love about it is that when you have an audience, a community, you have this ability to make decisions in near real time. And that's important. So if there's a shift in politics, if there's a shift in, you believe in something today and you're behind that today and you need to change that messaging, you have that ability to do that with your community. So that ability to be nimble is really important. But I don't want to mistake that for the flying by the seat of your pants, so saying that, okay, the marketers we're working with today aren't planning for 12 months, it doesn't mean they're not planning. It just means they're planning maybe quarter by quarter, or they're planning for the next, 4 to 6 weeks, but they're able to use the technology and the data to make decisions in near real time. And that's, again, giving them, I believe, a competitive advantage. We always talk about technology being agile and working in sprints. Why do we do that as a technology company? It allows us to shift and change based on the needs of our customers in the market. But I think that's what marketers are also doing. They're really leveraging that agility and the technology and the data to be able to make decisions in near real time. And I think that's powerful. And whether they were planning to do that before or the pandemic forced them to do it, I actually think we're in a good place to help future-proof brands for no matter what happens.
I think, brands being creative in how they think about and approach both the consumers, the data, some of the optimization, how they think about a post-pandemic, reality that soon, hopefully, will be setting in for all of us. Creativity is going to continue to be incredibly important. I think the agility piece of it is fascinating because I'd argue that it became even more apparent, the brands that were able to demonstrate that in the last 12 months, 12 to 15 months, and those that didn't. For those that have embraced this notion of agility and understand that, you need to be adept and nimble, able to pivot, I think it's going to be important for them to continue to have that as part of their playbook. At its heart, agility really implies that we can iterate and then we can improve, that there is this nimble aspect that you've kind of characterized. And I think, it wasn't necessarily, I would argue, as big of a dynamic, perhaps in 2019 and some of the years preceding that. It definitely has become that in the last 12 to 15 months. And I would argue it needs to stay. Brands need to recognize that agility is a good thing. It can work in their favor. And if they don't demonstrate the ability to be nimble and agile, if they don't continue to embrace this notion of how you bring together the creativity and the iterative aspect of what you're doing, you're not going to be able to keep in step with the rapid pace of change that we're all seeing.
It is very, very important. If you look at last year, brands who pivoted, they survived, right? And they also made sure they can keep that connection with their customers. And brands who didn't, they just kind of perished. So of course, pivoting was very important and being agile is very important. But this also gave us an opportunity to look at the existing journey of the customer, the existing touch points we have with them, and how to change them, how to rebuild that relationship. That definitely happened.
think it's incredibly important, especially in a time when brands have seen some of the best results coming out of this past year. They're challenged to keep that momentum and also not lose those newly retained customers. We're even seeing a lot of brands not even able to comp metrics to last year and having to go back to 2019 because it was such a great year. So you want to make sure your loyalty program is flexible. The benefits are needing to be pulsed throughout the year. We need to watch engagement. We need to make sure that everything continues to stay at those potentially all-time highs. But this is not a year to kind of do a set it and forget it in terms of your loyalty program, any of your benefits. Now's the time to come stronger than ever with these new customers that have been obtained this past year.
Yeah, no question. And there's, as you say, quite rightly, there's never been a sort of tougher time for many industries to have to turn on a dime and show that agility to respond to the creation of new business models or the morphing of new business models because of the pandemic. We've had some fantastic case studies of people in some of the hardest hit industries that, because they had the right infrastructure, they had the right views on data to their consumers, they were able to accelerate some of this digital transformation that was necessitated by COVID. A great one is Blooming Brands, and they've talked about it quite a bit. Having to move a 90% increase in their home delivery and curbside pickup business, within weeks of the pandemic kind of hitting. And, that's a big consumer trend. And, as we think about kind of agility, it's not just how they responded to the pandemic, it's also the opportunities for revenue as the pandemic eases and as things start to open up. For example, take someone like Blooming Brands in that industry, restaurants and bars, the individuals that were coming in and actually consuming the curbside pickup or the online delivery, were those the same customers that were coming in to, have their Friday night dinner in the restaurants? There's new groups of individuals that are connecting with brands because of this digital transformation. And the goal, with many of these industries is to make sure that you're retaining the new digital interactive methods with some of your older traditional formats, like in restaurant dining, because if you can get consumers to do both, that's your best return in terms of overall customer lifecycle value. You're only going to do that with data integration and proper insights into consumer behavior, and then being able to respond to it, to give the right, this segment, this group of individuals, the right offer that's going to make them a more valuable customer over time.
A bunch of things are coming to my mind right now, I think, and I'll try to touch on a few of them, but I think in short, it's really important. The past year, like you said, has demonstrated that, brands need to be flexible and nimble. And I think maybe to the point you were making is that wasn't necessarily the case before Q1 of 2020. Brands could be brands and they could do it their way. And oftentimes that worked. We saw that, being agile was a very important element of having success over the past 15 months or so. I do believe while it was difficult for us to adjust, both our brands that we work with, their customers that shop there, as well as suppliers of those, I do think there's some good to come out of it. I think what you're seeing is that brands are identifying that there's a requirement to be consumer first. And that if you can serve the consumer, and again, you can work within the bounds in some cases that were unthinkable 15 months ago, of having to shut stores down, open them up, deal with things like, the crisis of having physical change to give out in stores and having to go credit cards only, having to think about how the labor market has been impacted, especially in the everyday retail vertical, and how to manage store hours because you can't hire enough people. There's so many different things happening right now in these industries that we work in. I think at the end of the day, everybody's going to look back and say, the one thing we learned was that putting the consumer at the center of our business and focusing on their needs was what allowed us to continue to succeed during these, what were effectively very crazy times for everybody.